Welcome everyone to NSTA web seminars where you can find live interactive learning at your desktop. Tonight's presentation is titled Monarch Butterflies and Citizen Science. Our presenters are Jim O'Leary and Grant Bowers. My name is Bryn Slate. I will be moderating today, and we have Jeff Lehman online with us to provide technical support. Before we jump in, I did want to remind everyone to visit the NSTA Learning Center, which is your online portal for over 10,600 resources for science educators. And we've got thousands of resources for free that you can access. We also have the My Library function, which makes it easy to save resources to access when it's a good time for you. If you're looking for a way to connect with other science teachers, share your questions and comments, do check out our community forums. If you need help finding resources there in the Learning Center, you can reach out to our online advisors, and we also have free tools that are available to help you organize your professional learning and meet your goals. And you can find it all by going to learningcenter.nsta.org. And now let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First we'll have Jim O'Leary from the Maryland Science Center, and then Grant Bowers from the Monarchs in the Classroom Lab at the University of Minnesota. And at this point, I will turn it over to Jim to get things started. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Bryn. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening, taking time out of your day. We are at the Maryland Science Center, where I am in Baltimore, Maryland. We are part of a team that helped produce a new IMAX film called Flight of the Butterflies, and that premiered internationally back in October, so it's been playing for about 6 or 7 months in different IMAX theaters around the country and around the world. So for a poll here, just curious, has anybody seen the film Flight of the Butterflies, either in an IMAX theater or another large format theater? The logo here says it's in 3D, which is true. It's a 3D film, but also plays in 2D in theaters that aren't equipped for 3D. So I see a number of no's. Oh, there's somebody who's seen it. That's great. Oh, Cynthia, you were at our workshop, I believe, so that's great that you saw it. It's about a 40-minute IMAX film, very immersive, takes you to the overwintering sites of the monarchs, shows you a lot about their life cycles. So I encourage you to catch it if you can at some point. So the film received funding from the National Science Foundation, which is responsible for helping us fund programs through the National Science Teachers Association. We've worked with NSTA and also with a group called Monarchs in the Classroom at the University of Minnesota. And our other presenter tonight is Grant Bowers. And we've been hosting together a number of educator workshops for classroom teachers and informal educators that are in museums, including 3 at past NSTA conferences in Louisville and Phoenix late last year and in San Antonio just a few weeks ago. So I'm wondering if any of you online attended that symposium in San Antonio. I recognize at least one name. Maybe there are others as well. We do have some other workshops coming up at future NSTA conferences we're happy to announce. We'll be at the regional conferences both in Portland, Oregon in October, and at the NSTA Regional Conference in Denver in December. So hope if you're in those areas, you might be able to join us there. And we're also looking at the National Conference in Boston in 2014, so we hope we can be part of that as well. And if you're in those areas, we'd love to have you there. Each of the workshops we've done so far and the future ones will include a screening of the film itself in IMAX. Grant and his team bring live monarch specimens, including adult monarchs, so it's very exciting seeing all these specimens close up. And we also have demonstrations of activities for the classroom that Grant and his team will lead everybody through that have been received very well. So we're happy to be working with them. So what we're going to do now is take you on a bit of a tour of the website for the film. And this is what it looks like. Bryn's put up a copy of the page. What I'll do is take you to that page so you can see what it looks like. And I'll take you on a bit of a tour to show you what we have there for you, both educationally and also indicating what. Oops, I'll try to take you to the website. So bear with me for a second. Looks like I have the wrong URL in. Well, the W might help.
Yes. Yeah, it looks like we need another W, Jim.
Yeah, I'm trying to put it in, but it's not letting me do that.
Let's go ahead and go back to the whiteboard, and then we can go back to Web Tour and start over. There you go.
Do it once again? Okay, very good. Okay, give me 1 second. I'll just copy it once again and put it back in. Here we go. So we'll copy. Yeah, it's not letting me copy, so I guess I'll just have to type it in. And we're getting there, so I'll wait for everybody's browsers to catch up. And you'll see the home page that says Flight of the Butterflies in 3D with a couple of reviews of the film, all very positive, which is nice to see. And a number of butterflies trailing off into the distance there. So what I'll do is I will navigate to different pages, and then once we get to pages we may have to do some scrolling. You'll have to do that individually on your own computer, scroll up and down while I take you to the different pages of the website. So we're going to go to the Continue To website, which has a number of tabs we can take a look at, and also has a trailer of the film. It's about a 90-second preview of the film. Gives you a sense of some of the footage that you'll be able to see when you see the IMAX film itself. My page is slow in getting there. I don't know about everybody else's. And then again, the site you see Bryn's put on there, it's www.flightofthebutterflies.com. My web page doesn't seem to be updating. I don't know about the rest of you. How about you, Bryn? Is it moving for you?
I'm still on Flight of the Butterflies in 3D, the first part.
So am I. So I'm clicking on Continue To Website, and I hear a telltale click in my ear, so that's a good sign, but nothing is moving yet.
I've also got it open in a separate browser, so folks can also do that. You can click on the link that I've put in the chat window, and if that one opens sooner, then we can also proceed that way.
So I'm
and
not
Maria
getting
says, beautiful page. You're right, Maria. It's the graphics are awesome, and then you'll see in a moment the film really brings that to life as well.
So Maria's browser, did it take you to the next page with the tabs, or are we still on the first page that we brought up?
Jim, I'm still spinning, and I actually got an error as well. So.
Oh, I finally got there. My browser finally took us there, yeah. And I see somebody got an internal server error. Browser error. Oh my goodness, everybody's getting errors.
Couple got the error message, right?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you go ahead, Jim? If you're getting it, we can, for the a few of you got in. Okay,
yeah.
good.
There we go. This is looking better now, so that's good.
Okay.
So on this page, you'll see some tabs across the top. I'll take you through a few of those in a moment, but first I wanted you to play the trailer, which you see in the middle with the little play symbol. So I'll click that, but you might just click it as well to play the trailer. And it gets about 90 seconds. So we'll give it a shot and see if everybody can watch that. So here we go. coming soon and now playing. So I see some of you had some difficulty with it. Some of you are able to see it, but again, you can go there at your leisure and take a look at the trailer. If you didn't see it, the film covers not only the Monarch's migration and its life cycle, but also the scientists who literally spent a lifetime trying to discover where monarchs migrate to and trying to find their overwintering sites. And there's some amazing images of those overwintering sites in Mexico with literally hundreds of millions of butterflies in the trees there. So it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful site. So what we're going to do now is take a look at some of the tabs across the top so you can get a sense of what's there. On the film tab, we're going to go down and look at theaters and reviews just so you can get a sense of where this might be playing. There are now over about 50 plus theaters showing the film worldwide. And again, if your browser takes you to the page, I'm there now, but you'll have to scroll down yourself to just take a quick look at where the film is playing. Number of places around the world. You see Canada, Australia, Kuwait, many places in the U.S. as well. And near the very bottom, you'll see some of the coming soon theaters. And I see this has been updated since I even last looked at it, so that's good. So you might be able to see it in your neighborhood coming soon, we hope. So if we go back to the top again, to the tabs, we're going to move over to on Monarchs, the next tab over, and click on the butterfly. And this is something you'll see explained in the film as well. You see a diagram of the monarch and its different parts. And if you go farther down the website, about 2/3 of the way or even more, you'll see two images of a butterfly, the male and the female, ways to be able to tell them apart from the patterns on their wings. The film details mostly the female butterfly and their amazing migration, which is it's just a marvelous, marvelous story. Okay, back to the tab at the top again, Monarchs. This time we're going to look at life cycle. And again, something that's displayed in the film, and Grant and his team do a lot of demonstrations of at the workshops, are the life cycle of the monarch. We'll wait for the web page to get us there. Again, mine is a little bit slow, so we'll see how it goes. Here it goes. Mine is now there. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the 4-stage life cycle of the monarch. And if you scroll down even further, you'll see egg and caterpillar described, and also the instar stages, the many stages that the caterpillar goes through as it grows many, many times. And finally, at the very bottom, read this when you get a chance about the supergeneration. It's one of the unique characteristics of this species, the long, long migration and the long life cycle of this particular generation of the monarch. It's an amazing story. And back up to the Monarch tabs again at the top. I'm going to click this time on Epic Migration, right next to Life Cycle. And here I just want to point out a map that shows up on this page, about halfway down, very colorful map in yellow, orange, and green from Monarch Watch, which is a group Grant will be telling you about a little bit later. And this gives you an indication of the migration of these creatures. The orange arrows show you how they migrate from late summer into fall, down south from Canada, the northern U.S., and they make their way over the Rio Grande in Texas to a very compact location of overwintering sites marked by the blue star there in central Mexico. Hundreds of millions of them migrate to that site. And then a reverse migration in the spring, where they make their way back up into the warmer climates of the U.S. and northern Canada. So this is something you'll see demonstrated in the film. We talk about the workshops, and Monarch Watch has lots of information about that. And again, Grant will be talking about that as well later. Just two more to look at. If we go all the way over to the tab that's marked Sponsors and Partners. Give that a second to load. You'll see plenty of sponsors that are in Mexico. They've been very helpful in making this film happen. But about halfway down, you'll see the educational participants. And again, the National Science Foundation was critical in their funding to make this film and all the workshops and educational material available to teachers worldwide. And you also see a connection there to our own institution, the Maryland Science Center, and Grant's institution, the Monarchs in the Classroom. Something you can explore on your own at your leisure. And then finally, go to the Learning Center of utmost interest, I think, to everybody here tonight. And if we go over to the first tab, which says Get Involved, and on this Get Involved, you'll see a demonstration of an activity which is, I know a number of classes and schools have done, which is plant your own butterfly garden. And there are a number of steps there that indicate you should scroll down where to plant a garden, what to put in the garden, and the importance of milkweed seeds. And finally, at the very bottom, monarchs arriving at your garden. So something you could try with your class or your school. It's a great activity. And then at the Learning Center one more time, the tab next to Get Involved that says In the Classroom. There are many activities available here for you to use. And give it a second to load. Here it is for me. And here in the classroom, you'll see activities that are arranged in age levels from kindergarten up through high school, both in English and Spanish. And these activities are all taken from Monarchs in the Classroom's very in-depth curriculum guides. There are probably about 24 activities here on these different pages. But if you take part in these workshops that we've been talking about, you'll get a copy of one of these grade level activities, which has dozens of activities for you to try in the classroom. I'll just click on one here. So this is usually a little slow in opening, but I'll click on activities for all age groups and see if that opens up for us. Oh, good, it did open up for me. And again, this is a bit more information on planting a butterfly garden, which you could try for pretty much any grade level, or like I said, a whole school. This is laid out more like a lesson plan, so it allows you to look at all the procedures and materials that you would need for a garden. And if you go all the way down, you'll see all the materials and steps in putting your own butterfly garden together. So plenty of activities here for all grade levels, and that's something that, again, you can explore when you get a chance. At your leisure. So that completes my part of the tour. If you have any questions about that right now, I'm happy to answer them, or I'll pass it back to Bryn and she can introduce Grant.
Well, thank you, Jim. We'll go ahead and give folks a few moments to type in any questions you might have about the film itself or about accessing the website. And we'll go ahead and in just another moment here move on to the next section. But I'll give folks just a few moments to type in any questions they might have. And I've seen some comments about folks checking out the Now Playing list, being able to see it in their area. There's a question, let's see, Cynthia's asking about the release to DVD. Jim?
Oh yes, that is planned. Typically, what happens with IMAX films is they premiere in the theaters first, of course, and then usually within a year, a DVD is coming out. Don't know the exact plans for that, but that will be available eventually. And Marie is asking about bringing it to Santo Domingo. Don't know about large format theaters there, but eventually the DVD will be both in English and Spanish, so it'll be available for your students as well. And Susan saw some monarchs in her garden today. That's great. Yes,
it sounds like spring is coming, and we were chatting a little bit with Grant earlier about even coming to the northern parts of the country. So maybe now's a good time to hear from Grant and see how things are going on his end. And we'll take any additional questions for Jim later in the program as well. So Grant, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Bryn. Thank you, Jim. Yes, spring is here. Yesterday was our first 80-degree day in Minnesota, and we were just ecstatic about it. So first step, 80 degrees. Next step, monarchs back in Minnesota. So hopefully we can talk about monarchs today, which is always exciting. So there are kind of two purposes or two goals to these webinars and these NSTA symposia. The first is to spread the word about the film, but then also we are hoping that teachers will not only take their students to see the film, but also implement some of these lessons or activities within their classrooms, either before or after, or both, after seeing the film with their classrooms. So with that, in addition to the activities, there are also some citizen science programs that are about monarchs, and I will begin by just briefly defining what citizen science is. The definition that I use is just participation of volunteers in research projects led by trained scientists. So it's not a complicated definition, but I think it's one that works. Citizen science is, there are all kinds of different projects about all kinds of different organisms. I think one of the more famous examples is the Christmas bird count that Audubon does every year. They have data going back almost 100 years across the country. So I think that is a very large data set that one or a handful of scientists could not have collected on their own. And so I think you're able to collect data for a long time and also from a large area by incorporating volunteers into the project, into the data collection. And then one other quick note is that another name for citizen science is public participation in scientific research. Those are the same things, but there was some confusion there for a while that maybe that non-citizens of a given country were not welcome to participate in these projects, and that is not the case. So both of those terms are referencing the same thing, the same type of programs. And I also wanted, before I get into excuse me, the four topics that I wanted to talk about today, I just wanted to mention that monarchs are one of the most intensively monitored species. So their entire life cycle is monitored in one way or another, be it in the spring migration when the monarchs are traveling north, whether it's when they're in their breeding range or with the eggs and caterpillars. There are programs dedicated to counting the adult butterflies. There are programs about the fall migration, and then there are actually there's a project that counts that tries to estimate the area that the monarchs occupy within the overwintering sites in Mexico. And I think somebody was referencing that in the chat log before we got started here. That I think it's WWF that measures the overwintering area, and this past winter was the smallest it had ever been since they've been collecting that data. I think it was like 1.2 or 1.3 hectares, somewhere in there. And then this list here on the right is not an exhaustive list of monarch programs that are out there, but I wanted to give you a sense of the volume of projects that are out there, and also that some of these are regional projects, some of them are national projects. So you know, if you're really interested in this, I would encourage you to do a little digging online to see what's out there, both on a national level and what might be available to you on a local level as well. So with that, we will talk about 4 different projects here. The first one is the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which is the program that we run here out of the University of Minnesota. It started in 1997. And today we have over 800 sites in 36 states and 3 Canadian provinces, so it's pretty exciting. I will say that of those 800 and some odd sites, that something like 200 of those are in Minnesota, so we definitely have room to grow in the other states. And I was looking at the map that you guys had up earlier, that there were some dots on the map in California and Texas and New Mexico. And we would be thrilled to add some monitoring sites in other states. So to participate in this project, there are actually 2 ways. The first way is to monitor a site weekly. To do that, to start monitoring or to start participating in this project, you would first register yourself on our website as a volunteer, and then you would explain some characteristics or features of your monitoring site. A monitoring site could be a park, it could be your backyard, it could be a garden, it could be a nature center, anywhere that milkweed grows, and it can be milkweed that grew there naturally, or it could be milkweed that someone planted. We don't care either. We just want to know kind of what kind of milkweed it is and what this site looks like. And once you've entered all those characteristics of your site, then you're ready to monitor. And to do that, you'd go out about once a week and count the number of milkweed plants that you observe and record the number of monarch eggs and caterpillars that you see on those plants. And then you would submit those numbers to our website, and that gets added to our online database. The other way that you can participate is anecdotally, and I will talk about that more in a minute, but that's actually a less intense way of monitoring, I guess you could say. And I'll show you how to do that when I show you our website. So this graph here is actually data that has come from our volunteers. So we wouldn't have this graph if it weren't for those 800 monitoring sites and all those volunteers. I think this is an interesting graph because I actually don't really see a pattern in the density of monarchs on a yearly basis. So I can explain the y-axis here. It's the peak number of eggs per milkweed in the upper Midwest. And we use the upper Midwest because that's where we have the best data from. And by best, I just mean the most. So just to give an example of the density here, it's kind of funny to be talking about 0.1 caterpillars, but they're 0.1 monarch eggs. If you looked at 100 milkweed plants and you saw 10 caterpillars on those plants, then your density would be 0.1. And so that's how we're recording, or how we're reporting, rather, our data. It seems to make the most sense based on what we have. And the red line across the middle of that graph is the average for those years listed. So there have been some pretty low years and some pretty high years as well. But really, I think it's interesting just to see that there have been peaks and valleys within the monarch population. And with that, I will take us to the MLMP website. And I think just because we were having some problems a bit earlier, I actually won't use the tour. I'll just paste the links into the chat log. So there is the web page for the MLMP homepage. And I will give you a second to click on that and let that load. The first thing I want to point out is that there's a big yellow button right on the middle of the homepage about signing up to monitor. That is where you'll go to start doing this, to start participating, to tell us about the characteristics of your monitoring site, and then after that you'll log in with your username and password on the left. So you only have to do that once. The first thing I want to show you is under the monitoring tab on the left side, all the way at the end, called Submit an Anecdotal Observation. If you click that link, and then I'll have you scroll down to the bottom where it will ask you for your name and where you live and that kind of thing. And then it will ask for your observation. So what did you see? Where did you see it? What else can you tell us about it? And I think, so this, you don't actually have to be an official signed up volunteer to enter these anecdotal observations. This could be as simple as, oh, I was walking in the park today and I saw a monarch and I want somebody to know that there was a monarch there. And that is actually really valuable data for us because we can't know where monarchs are or where they aren't unless people are out looking for them. So an absence of data doesn't mean an absence of monarchs, if that makes any sense. So these are important observations, and we do use this data. I will say that the weekly observations, that those data sets are more rich for us, just because we can kind of get to see the progression of the monarchs across the season at a given site. But we recognize that that is kind of a big commitment for some people. So if you're wanting to participate but don't have maybe the time for that, the anecdotal observations are another route for you. The other thing I wanted to show you was in the Results and Findings tab of the website. Go to the first one listed there, the Monitoring Data and Graphs. If you click that, you end up with a map of the United States. So the shaded states are where we have monitoring sites. So we actually have no people monitoring in New Mexico. So that would be very exciting if one of you, I think there were 2 dots or 2 icons on that state from New Mexico. So somebody's got to get on that. That's the task. I'm going to click the state of Minnesota. And I think there are two things that I really like about our website. The first is that anyone can see the data. So I haven't logged in, you all have not logged in, but we'll still have access to the data. And I think that's really important because it lets people see that their data are being used, but it also allows for a lot of really cool data comparisons. We had a student group who they live in New London, Minnesota, and they were monitoring, and they noticed that there was another monitoring site in New London, Wisconsin, so it had the same town name. And so for fun, they were interested in comparing the monarch densities at those 2 sites. And they were able to do that because they didn't need any special permission to see the other site's data set. So I am going to, and the one other thing that I like about our website I'll get to in just a second. Under the year selection, I'm just going to select 2012. And when you do that, if you scroll down below the map of Minnesota, you get a series of graphs. So this graph, the first graph here about monarch density in Minnesota in 2012, tells us that monarchs were here in Minnesota on April 29th, which was 1 year ago today. That's not going to happen this year because the snow just left within the last week. But so we'll be a little bit behind last year. I know that last year was an early year though, so I think we would still be pretty close to average, but we'll see. So you can kind of see that there's a pretty big peak or big spike in the number of monarchs seen per milkweed at the beginning of the season, and then it kind of trails off, and then there's another second smaller peak in the middle of July, which is pretty typical for what happens in the upper Midwest, because that first generation of monarchs that's migrating back, they lay their eggs, and then those eggs develop and lay their own lay their offspring, and those are the eggs that we see in the middle of July. So you can kind of see the two peaks here within the season. These graphs are generated for each site as well. So as soon as you enter your data every week, you can see the bar graph get added. And I think that is so cool. I like seeing that because I get to know that my data have been entered. But I think it's also really neat for kids to see because there's some instant gratification there that is pretty interesting. One other thing that I wanted to show you, so if you scroll back up to the top and go to the Training tab and click on the MLMP Online Training, if you scroll down, this is something that's new to our website within the last month. We have a series of videos that we've developed. So if you are interested in participating in this project and want to know more and really dig into how to do this, kind of get the nuts and bolts of it, these videos will allow you to do that. So there's a series of 11 videos. None of them are that long, but I think they really go in depth about what you need to know to be a super volunteer with the MLMP. And then finally, if you scroll back to the top, there's a newsletter link or a newsletter tab. That first one is a link to submit your email address to be on our mailing list. We only send out one email a month about updates about monarchs and about the MLMP. And then you can also see that we've archived our annual newsletters, and then we switched to monthly updates in the last year or two. So if you're interested in that and kind of keeping up to date with monarchs in our lab, that would be a way for you to do that. Those are the things I wanted to show you on our website. I would encourage you to poke around on your own time. If you get a chance, we do have a lot of information on our website. I think it's pretty well organized, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to add to it and how to organize it. so it is useful for others. So with that, we'll go back to the slideshow here, and I will pose a question to you all. In what ways could you imagine using the MLMP in your classroom? While you all are thinking about that and entering and typing your responses in the boxes, I am going to take a look and see if there are any questions. If you have any questions for me, if you've left any questions in the chat log, I will take a look and do my best to answer those.
Thanks, Grant, and I'll mention to everybody that your toolbar is now open, so you can select the text box tool, which is the 4th button down, and it looks like a little box with an A on it. If you select that, you can then put your cursor on the screen and type some of your ideas there into our table, and this will be a great collaborative space to get a sense of some of your ideas for the classroom, and I know we've had some good chat going on, teachers sharing ideas and excitement about potentially using some of this information in the classroom. So feel free to type that up on the whiteboard space as well and share with everybody some ideas.
Okay. It looks like Maria pointed out that she found the videos on YouTube. So it looks like she was having some problems with her Mac getting the videos to play on our website, but they are on YouTube. I could, a little bit later here at the end, I can try to dig up the exact link to where they're found. But I think if you Google or do a search on the YouTube homepage for like the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project video, I think they show up. It looks like you guys have a lot of really great ideas here for about how you could use this. I'm seeing examples about planting milkweed and monitoring. So going back to Jim's discussion there, how he pointed out about the how to plant a butterfly garden on the Flight of the Butterflies website, comparing data with other regions, doing a math science interdisciplinary lab. I think these are all really great ideas. And taking pictures with their iPads, I think that's a really cool kind of addition of technology in there. So I think we're gonna move on here for the sake of time, but I'm really excited to hear that or to read about all of your really good ideas. The next project I want to talk about is Project Monarch Health. This is a project that is run out of the University of Georgia at Athens by a former graduate student of Karen Oberhauser's, and Karen is the professor who I work for. So the web address for this project is just monarchparasites.org. And the project centers around a protozoan parasite that infects monarchs. That parasite is called Ophriocistis electroscura, which is sort of the $10 word of the day. We refer to it as OE. The life cycle of OE kind of parallels the life cycle of the monarch, and I will begin by explaining it up here at the top, where the females scatter the spores of the parasite on and around the monarch egg here, and then when the caterpillar hatches from that egg, the first thing it does is it eats its eggshell, and so now those spores are in the gut of the monarch, and that's where it reproduces until the monarch is able to create its chrysalis, and then those spores form again, and those spores are now on the outside of the monarch's abdomen, and then the process repeats. So this is something that happens in the wild, somewhere around like a 5 or 10% infection rate. I should say that it's true of the eastern migratory population, so everything east of the Rocky Mountains. In our lab, when we're raising monarchs, it can get out of control pretty quickly because the densities are so high. If one monarch gets it, it's pretty easy for them to all get it within a generation or two. So it really is an interesting parasite in that perspective, in that only at high infection loads or high spore loads would it kill its host. But so the lighter infections can result in like wing development issues where maybe their wingspans aren't as large, or they can't fly as fast, or they can't fly as far. So there are some non-lethal effects to being infected, but for the most part, this is not a parasite that kills its host in every instance. I will say, I think this is a really interesting graph because it's got data from 60 years ago almost about the infection rate. And with the eastern migratory population, like I said, it's somewhere between 5 and 10%. With the western migratory population, which would be the monarchs west of the Rocky Mountains, so in California and then parts of Oregon and Washington, the infection rate is a little bit higher, somewhere between 25 and 35%. But what's most interesting to me is this population in South Florida. So they aren't considered to be part of the eastern migratory population because these monarchs, as far as we know, do not migrate to Mexico. There's milkweed that is plentiful year-round, and so their offspring have a food source, and it doesn't freeze. Excuse me. So it doesn't freeze, and so they're able to stay there year-round. Because of that, and because the milkweed doesn't die back every year, we see infection rates, in some cases as high as 90%. We don't see that in other parts of the country because the milkweed dies back in the fall, and then it regrows, of course, in the spring. And so any spores that would be on those milkweed leaves go away with that dead milkweed. So they are looking for volunteers to test monarch butterflies, the adults, for OE, and they provide free sampling kits to do this. And basically what's going on here is that this person is taking one of these labels, so they're just clear sticky labels, and touching both sides of the monarch's abdomen. And you can see here these little, those are scales that are on the monarch. And all monarchs have scales, so that's what gives them their color on their abdomen, and then the orange on their wings, those are scales as well. But if you look at this under a microscope, you can see the difference between the scales and the spores. And with that, we will go to the Monarch Parasites homepage here. Let me paste that into the chat window. And so once you get to the home page, if you could just click the Project Monarch Health link at just right next to the home button, and then click on Project Results. So I think their website is really interesting in that you can kind of see what's going on within the 3 different subpopulations of the monarchs. And I think this is just a really great example of what citizen science can do for scientists, how really everyone benefits. The scientists benefit and the volunteers benefit by getting some exposure to science and hopefully having some fun in the process. So I'm scrolling down below the map to the first graph. And it's a graph of the proportion of heavily infected monarchs in kind of the early, middle, and late parts of the season for a number of years. I think it's interesting that at the end, or even towards the middle and end of every year, the infection rate is increasing, and I think that's a result of more monarchs being on milkweed and the milkweed being older, so it's had more time to perhaps have some of those spores scattered on it by adults. And we actually, we are in our lab, we're using milkweed that is grown outside, and so we think that's probably the reason we can't completely get rid of OE in our lab, is because that it's coming in on milkweed, and even though we try to rinse it, it might not wash away all the spores. So I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities here with talking about disease in general and kind of the ecology of disease, and talking about parasites too. So I think there's some cool kind of ways to weave this into existing curriculum ideas. So I think those are the only things I wanted to cover on their website. I would say, again, if you get a chance to take a look at their website, it's pretty good. And there's a lot there. So hopefully I've explained this well enough for you to get some sense of what's going on. And I'm going to pose the same question to you all here again. In what ways could you imagine using Monarch Health in your classroom? And while you are thinking about that and answering that question, I'll check out the chat log to see if I have missed any of your questions.
Thanks, Grant. Another great website, and we'll take everybody's ideas now and questions as well. Feel free to type any questions into the chat window for Grant, and also we're looking forward to seeing what everybody's ideas are on our whiteboard space, so you can use that text box tool again to collaborate with your peers up here on the whiteboard and start sharing the good ideas and get those flowing. And it's a really exciting space. We get to see what everybody's thinking for the classroom and how you might be able to apply this particular project.
And there's one thing I forgot to mention. They're only interested in having their volunteers spore check butterflies that were that came from the wild. So there are two ways that you can go about doing that. You can search for monarch eggs and caterpillars on milkweed plants, bring those inside and raise those in containers and then test the resulting adult butterfly. Or you can go out with a net and just directly catch adult monarch butterflies from the wild and then just tape their abdomens in the field and release them the same day. Honestly, I think it's easier to find the monarch caterpillars and monarch eggs for two reasons. One, there are more eggs and caterpillars than there are butterflies in the wild. I think an adult female monarch is capable of laying over 500 eggs in her lifetime. And two, I think it's kind of difficult to go out in the field with a butterfly net and expect to catch a monarch, even if you can find one. So if you're wanting to participate in this project, I would recommend the first method, where you would find eggs and caterpillars in the wild. There are some rearing instructions on how to raise monarchs in a classroom on our own website, which is monarchlab.org. I will enter that into the chat log here as well. But I knew there was something I had forgotten to explain, and that was it. So they're only interested in the results of wild-caught monarchs. And it looks like there are some really good ideas about enhancing the Protista unit. I hadn't thought about that, but that would be kind of a real-world example of the Protista kingdom. And talking about ecosystems and population, I think those are some good ideas as well. And testing butterflies with older students. I think I should mention that so in our lab taping the monarchs doesn't kill them. It doesn't hurt them. We've taped some monarchs get taped a couple of times because we can't really tell for sure under a microscope if they're infected or not. So there isn't really, as far as we know, we're not causing any harm or damage or pain or anything like that to any of the monarchs. So I think this is a fun one because it's something that you can do in your classroom. It's something that is kind of a one-shot deal because you end up mailing those, like the note card with the labels on it. You end up mailing them to the lab in Georgia. And so they're the ones that are looking at it under a microscope and deciding what is infected and what isn't. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't look at it under a microscope first and make your own decisions. They have plenty of photos on their website of what the Monarch scales look like and then what the parasite spores look like. So you could definitely make your own diagnosis before you send in those cards. I think for the sake of time here, I'm going to have us move on to the third citizen science project, which is Journey North. Journey North, I think, is a pretty dynamic website. It does, they follow migrations, and they're doing more than just monarchs. So if you're interested in teaching about migrations, I highly recommend this website because they track some bird migrations, some whale migrations. I think they do a lot of really cool stuff. But in terms of monarchs, they track the spring migration first of all, and so this is I think this is fun for me because you get to see the progression of the monarchs migration north each year, and especially this year where in Minnesota it's been the winter that has hopefully finally ended at the end of April. It's been exciting to know that the monarchs are in fact coming our way. So for people who are wanting to participate in this project, it's pretty simple. You just record the date on their website of when you saw your first monarch of the season, and then you end up as a data point on their map. So it's pretty easy. It's kind of a one-shot deal. You can do that in the spring with your first adult butterfly sighting. And you can also do it with the first time you see like a milkweed plant sprouting, and I think that's kind of fun too because I'll show you the maps here in a minute. The milkweed is always ahead of the monarchs, so the monarchs are kind of following they're following the milkweed's germination north. So you know, the monarchs need that host plant to lay their eggs on, so they're not going to venture farther north than they can find milkweed, which I think is pretty interesting. So in addition to spring migrations, they also, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think this is a really interesting map of the order of state by state occupation in the spring. So not surprisingly, monarchs come back to Texas first. But what I think is interesting is that they're not going to a neighboring state of Texas second. They're actually found in Florida second. And I think that is more a product of the number of people looking for monarchs than it is of the monarchs migration. I mean, obviously, for monarchs to get from here to here, they are probably not crossing the Gulf of Mexico. They might be kind of hugging the coast, but we don't, as far as we know, they're not doing any of this, like kind of, you know, they're not crossing large bodies of water. So that makes me think that there are perhaps more people in Florida looking for monarchs, or that the monarchs are in more heavily populated areas than they are in Louisiana. So Louisiana is third, and then they kind of spread north and east from there. I think another example of this instance where there are more people looking for monarchs is with Kentucky, who is listed as 29th, along with Minnesota. And for me, this is fascinating for two reasons. It's fascinating because you can kind of see where the monarchs are going, but there's also this human perspective of it as well, where you've got different numbers of people looking for monarchs in different states. And I think there's some interesting teaching opportunities there as well, because it's not likely that monarchs are being seen here and here for the first time at the same time of the year, if that makes any sense. So I'm a fan of graphs, and I'm a fan of data, and I'm a fan of maps, and this just kind of combines it all into one. So I think this is great. So in addition to the spring migration, they also track some fall migration occurrences. I don't know how many of you know this, but the monarchs will sometimes overnight in roosts along their way to Mexico. We really don't know much about this. I've actually never seen this in person, and I get stories from people who have a tree in their backyard that for 10 years in a row, the monarchs have come back to it for one night. And then I hear stories from people who, well, 5 years ago we saw this in our neighbor's backyard and no one has seen it since. So in some cases they're coming back to the same place each year, and in some cases it's a one-shot deal, and we have no idea why or how it works. So if you see roosting monarchs anywhere, I highly encourage you to report that. Here are some other examples of monarchs in overnight roosting spots. I am not a tree expert, but I can tell you that these are not pine trees, which is what the monarchs roost in Mexico. So they're not picky about what they roost in on their way to Mexico. So I think, I don't know, it's just a fascinating phenomenon to me. They don't really fly together as far as we know. They're not like a flock of geese or anything like that. But it would be, consider yourself lucky if you get to see this. And with that, I'm going to paste 2 links into the chat log here. The first one is the map of the migration of the monarchs north this spring. So this is data that's happening now. It's being updated weekly. And then the second map is the same thing but with the milkweed. And I could just get lost watching these maps. I think it's so fun to kind of watch the progression of the dots north into. I think it's a really cool way to illustrate the data with these animated maps. So that's what's going on there. And like I said, you can kind of see how the milkweed is more north than the monarchs are each week. No monarchs in Minnesota yet, unfortunately, but they're getting there. They're in Missouri, and I see some dots in Michigan. No, the milkweed is in Michigan, but no monarchs yet. So I think this is kind of a fun thing. It's a fun thing. It's a fun educational tool, but I think it can also be used as a planning tool. If you're wanting to know when you can get started with monarchs or when to expect them to come back, you can look at this. And their website is actually really good. They have the maps archived from previous years, so you can see when they come back, not just for the current year, but also in the past as well. So you could kind of take an average of when monarchs are back in your area with that information if you wanted. I agree, Felicia. Kids like moving maps, and so do I. So I guess I'm just a big kid. With that, I will again pose the question of asking you all in what ways could you imagine using Journey North in your classroom. And I think there's been some activity in the chat log, so I will review that, and if there's anything I can answer, I will do so.
Thanks a lot, Grant, and we'll take everyone's ideas for Journey North into our whiteboard space. Your text box tool is now open and available for you to share some ideas, so feel free to share with us what you are thinking about this awesome site.
So I'll back up here a second. Krista asked about if the previous citizen science project, Monarch Health, if it discussed how to safely handle the monarch. I don't know if it does or not, but I will say monarchs are pretty durable as far as butterfly species go. I mean, they're able to cross the continent or go from north to south along the continent. And we see some monarchs in Mexico that make it, that have some pretty beat up wings. So one person handling them is probably not going to harm them. You just need to be sure that you're grabbing both of or all 4 of the wings together along the kind of front edge of the forewings, if that makes any sense. And if I might have a photo of it later of how to do that. I don't, unfortunately. It's easier to show than it is to explain, unfortunately. But the important thing is that you're holding the wings firmly enough and close enough to the monarch's body that they're not able to struggle and try to escape, because that struggling could end up damaging their wings. So, and there's kind of this myth that if you get the scales on your on your fingers that will kill the butterfly, and that's not true either. You can see that they wear gloves in those photos, and that's to prevent the transfer of spores. From monarch to monarch, it has nothing to do with scale loss, if that makes any sense. And it looks like you guys have a lot of really great ideas about data depiction and measurement. And the relationship between food sources and migration, that's a good one too. Map and graph theory, I like it. Biological movements. And yeah, I agree, this could be a really great way to encourage families to get involved because it is a pretty simple thing to participate. You're just recording or reporting the first time you see a monarch in your area. It kind of turns into a contest of who is the first person to see a monarch in your state. So it could be kind of a fun, friendly competition. I think I'm going to have us move on here, and we will finish up with Monarch Watch, which is the first, which I find is perhaps the most popular, I guess, of the citizen science projects we've talked about this evening. If people know of one project, it's the monarch tagging, and so that's what Monarch Watch is doing. This is Monarch Watch is run out of a lab at the University of Kansas, and they are the ones who are providing these monarch tags to anyone who's interested. And so it wasn't Monarch Watch, but it was Fred Urquhart who discovered where the monarchs went in Mexico. And that's part of, I think Jim mentioned this at the beginning, that that's part of kind of the other half of the story of the film, so you get to see how that happened. So his tags worked a little bit differently. They weren't this is like a hole punch size label. His actually folded over the front of the wing, and it was heavier than what we currently use. And Chip Taylor, who is he's the scientist who runs Monarch Watch, he actually told me that if Fred Urquhart was using these labels, he might not have discovered the monarchs because these labels were heavier. They were not actually getting all the way to Mexico. They were, dying before they crossed the border, which actually worked to his advantage because most people, the vast majority of people in Mexico didn't know about this tagging project, but he was able to spread the word enough in the 70s that there were people looking out for these tagged monarchs, and he was getting recoveries in Texas. So he knew that they were traveling in kind of this southwestern direction. Whereas if the monarchs if he was using these tags, they're lighter, and so they would have crossed the border, they would have been deeper into Mexico, and he perhaps would not have had as many recoveries. So I think that's a pretty interesting story how, these tags were, their flawed design actually turned out to be advantageous. So you can see that there is, you can kind of see that there's a unique number on each of these tags. So when you buy the tags from Monarch Watch, you get a simple data sheet along with it about the date you let the monarch go, where you were when you released it, if it's a male or a female, and then that number. And then you're allowed to let it go, and you send in that data sheet back to Monarch Watch. And if your monarch gets recovered, I think you get an email or a letter or something. I've actually never had one recovered, unfortunately, so I don't know exactly how that works. I think this is another interesting graph or an interesting map of the number of monarchs that need to be tagged for recovery from that area. This is data from 2001. Not surprisingly, 1 out of 12 and 1 out of 34 monarchs in these two regions will be recovered in Mexico. So I think, all things considered, that's a pretty good. Those are pretty good odds. Where you look at in the northern part of Minnesota, that number is 1 in 205. What is that? 0.5%, I think. So you can kind of see that the farther they're migrating in general, the less likely they are to be recovered. There are a couple of funny exceptions here. Again, with Louisiana, where it's 1 out of 351, and 1 out of 382. for Georgia and the southern part of South Carolina. The only explanation I would have for that is that, again, perhaps there aren't many people releasing tagged monarchs in these regions, and that's why they just don't have enough, the sample size isn't large enough to really get a sense of the chances of a monarch being recovered that's released from those areas. So again, I could just look at this all day long and kind of make different guesses and come up with different ideas about what's going on. But I think this is a really interesting map. There really isn't a whole lot to see, unfortunately, that I could find with Monarch Watch's website. The only thing I was going to show you is where is kind of the store that they have as to that's where you would purchase the Monarch tags. I won't do that today. I think we're running a little bit short on time. But I think you can order the tags any time of year, but they don't send them to you until shortly before you would be releasing them. They do that because they don't want people using tags from previous years for the current year. It kind of throws off their data analyses, and with those numbers, the unique numbers that are on each tag, they want people to use the tags that they've generated for that year, if that makes any sense. And I think so, you're kind of supporting some, monarch conservation along the way by participating in this project. I think those are kind of the high points of that project. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If you're raising monarchs in your classroom, if you're doing some of the activities from the curriculum guide or from the activity guide that has you raising monarchs, you might as well use this as a way to participate in the citizen science project as well. I will say that this only works for kind of the fall timeline, because they only want people tagging monarchs that will actually migrate, and those monarchs are the last generation of the year, or of the summer, I should say. So in Minnesota, most teachers who participate in our curriculum, who participate with in our programs, their monarch unit is the first one that they do of the year. So we start in the first week in September. And so day one, there are monarchs in those teachers' classrooms, and they're ready to go. And they've got milkweed, and they're hoping that it stays warm long enough for them to have a successful release when those caterpillars become adult butterflies. So I think those are my final comments, and I would just ask you all, which of the following citizen science projects you learned about here are you most likely to use in your classroom? So while you all are answering that poll, I will look through the chat log and see if there are any other questions or comments.
Thanks a lot, Grant. And everyone, our final poll question is open and ready for your responses. We'd love to hear from you which project you think might be of most use in your classroom. And I see we've got a number of E's coming in already. People are excited about multiple projects. But if one of these does seem like it'll be particularly relevant for your classroom, feel free to pick the appropriate letter. It's always great to get your feedback on what you think might be most applicable for the classroom and exciting for students. So we'll wait just another moment here and take additional responses on our poll. And I'll go ahead and put up our responses. It looks like we've got a number of people who are really excited about multiple projects. So that's great. It looks like most people are thinking more than one, Grant.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And I really like Cindy's idea about using this to discuss engineering design process. I know that there are, at least in Minnesota, there are a lot of like STEM standards, and I feel like the E in STEM is the one that is underrepresented. I hadn't thought about that before, but using the tags as a way to talk about engineering and that process, I think, is a really fascinating way to incorporate engineering into a Monarch curriculum. So I learned something tonight. So I think this is really exciting. I'm so glad that you guys are excited to do these and to participate in multiple projects. I feel like that's the highest number in any of the webinars that we've done. So, hooray! So with that, if there are other final questions, you can enter those in the chat log. Otherwise, I thank you for your participation and your enthusiasm. This is my email address here if you come up with other questions at some point down the road. And then this is our lab's website. So monarchlab.org is the University of Minnesota Monarch Lab. Like I said earlier, there are any number of resources at your disposal on our website. So thanks again, and I will turn it back over to Bryn.
Well, thanks a lot, Grant. It was another great web seminar, and exciting to see so much inspiration from our participants. They're looking forward to using this in the classroom, which is awesome. I wanted to take a moment here to thank Jim for telling us about the film, which I hope a lot of you have a chance to go check out. I know that a few of you had a chance to see it at the symposium in San Antonio, and some others of you found on the website that is showing near you. So hope you get a chance to check that out and take your students over to see Monarchs in 3D. It's an amazing experience, so I definitely recommend it. And a big thank you to Grant as well for sharing about citizen science projects and giving everybody all of these great ideas. Everyone, let's use our emoticon button. That's the one with the face on it, to give Jim and Grant a round of applause. Thank you so much to our presenters, and a big thank you to you, our participants, as well. We would also like to thank the sponsors of today's web seminar, Maryland Science Center, the Monarchs in the Classroom at the University of Minnesota, and the National Science Foundation. We'd also like to thank the administration of NSTA for their support for web seminars. And here's a look at our upcoming web seminar calendar. You can join us tomorrow, April 30th, for the next program in our NGSS Cross-Cutting Concepts series. We'll be looking at energy and matter, flows, cycles, and conservation. On May 1st, join us for a program in our NASA Explorer School series, Chemical Elements, Genesis, What Are We Made Of? And then on May 2nd, another from NASA, Temperature and Earth Climate, Modeling Hot and Cold Planets. You can register for these programs and more by going to learningcenter.nsta.org/webseminars. Thank you, everyone, again for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.